In this video, it's the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra versus the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra in a head-to-head benchmark thermal efficiency battery life test. So if you're finding it hard to tell the difference between these two devices right now because they look so similar, but you're thinking about whether it's worth spending the extra money on the S23 Ultra, I think this video is going to be an eye-opener for you. And to make this video even more interesting, let me introduce you to my little friend. This is Bill, the thermal imager. This gives us kind of predator vision, so we can actually get a proper look and check in periodically throughout this test to see how these two devices are handling the heat. And this version of the S22 Ultra is the European version, the Exynos version. That is an official Samsung chipset, whereas this year all of the Samsung S23 lineup have the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which is said to be way more power efficient and more powerful at the same time. So we will see exactly how much more power efficient and how much more powerful it really is. Anyway, are you ready? Okay, let's go. So in phase one, I'm going to be running the 3D Mark wildlife stress test, and I did check the thermals at the beginning just after the boot up, and they're both around 30 degrees. Now the wildlife stress test is designed to push the devices to the limits when it comes to graphics rendering and frame rates, and doing so whilst sustaining the optimal performance of the devices. So this should give you a good idea of how the two devices handle gaming. You can see both phones started on 100%. Actually, we lost 1% in the boot up on the S22 Ultra. In this test, both phones have lost 10%. But what's interesting here is actually it's showing that the temperature is a bit lower on the S22 Ultra. The frame rate was different, however, in the test. You can see the frame rate was actually half, 33 frames to 96, and on this one 17 frames to 43. So that it was putting less stress on the GPU. But let's see if these temperatures are actually accurate when we look at them with the thermal imager. The S22 Ultra is reading at 41.1 degrees, and it's all coming from this top right corner here. The S23 Ultra is reading at 40.6 degrees, and again all of the heat's coming from that top right corner. One thing I do notice about these two devices here is actually the S22 screen looks brighter than the S23, and they're both maxed out. Let me just double check that. Adaptive brightness is off, extra brightness is on, and the same thing here on the S22. I've never really looked at them side by side like that before, but you can see this one does seem to be quite a bit brighter. Anyway, let's run the Slingshot Extreme test now. Okay, phase two, we're running the Slingshot Extreme test. Now this is another graphics heavy stress test. It tests the GPU performance, and it also puts the Vulkan or OpenGL application processing interface to the test. To put that simply, this is just another very heavy graphics test on the two devices. So half an hour in, and we've dropped 12% here on the S23 Ultra, and we've dropped 14% here on the S22 Ultra. There's not much in it at this point. One thing worth noting about this particular test, once again, is the frame rates that are running here on the S23 Ultra go all the way up to 124 frames per second, whereas the maximum frame rate we're getting here on the S22 is 87 frames per second. And actually the S23 does seem to be getting a bit warmer according to this, 43 degrees maximum and 41 degrees maximum temperature here. But let's do another little thermal vision look at these. S22 is reading at 38.7. S23 is reading at 39.4. Okay, now let's run some Geekbench. So Geekbench, unlike the 3D Mark test, is a much more day-to-day user interface style test, and it tests the GPU and CPU performance over a variety of different tasks. So this is the results from the Geekbench CPU benchmark test, and you can see how much more powerful the S23 is compared to the S22. It's actually pretty much double in both areas. That was the CPU. Now let's test the GPU, and then we'll check the thermals. Okay, so when it comes to the GPU scores, they're actually a lot closer than I expected, but let's see how the thermals are now holding up. And actually, you'll probably notice the S23 screen now looks brighter than the S22. I wonder if there's some kind of software inside the phone that's actually limiting the max brightness and stuff and turning it up depending on the task. Anyway, let's check thermals. So S22 right now, max temperature is 41.2, and on the S23, max temperature is 37.6 roughly. So the PCmark work-life benchmark test test the performance of the device when it comes to CPU, GPU, also the storage read and write speeds. It's kind of a day-to-day work-life endurance test. So as you can see, the S23 once again significantly outperforms the S22. Let's check temperatures. S22 max temperatures reading about 38.9 roughly. S23 temperature 37.6, and there actually seems to be a bit of a dispersing of the heat going on around the middle of the device here. I wonder if Samsung's put an extra thermal dissipation layer in there or something, because I'm not seeing that on the S22. Okay, so as it turns out, both phones need to be on 80% in order to run this test, and because we're down to 78, now I've got to give this a bit of extra charge to get it to 80. What I'll try and do is actually get it to 82, so they're both matching at the beginning of the battery drain test. The PCmark work-life battery test essentially runs the work-life process continuously from 80% until 20%, and then it gives you a reading of how much it thinks you would get on a normal work day with continuous things going on the phone. But do keep in mind, in order for me to get this to run on both devices, I have to boost the S22 Ultra up by 4%. So the results at the end will be -4%. And now let's take a look at the thermals at the 2-hour mark. So on the S22 Ultra, we're getting around 42 degrees in the top right corner, and actually starting to warm up in the bottom right corner here as well. So that's quite interesting. On the S23, the temperature seems to be far more stable. Now, when it comes to the actual battery life in the two devices, right now we've got 59% on the S22. The S23 is on 66% and clearly beginning to pull away from the S22 Ultra, meaning it's far more energy efficient. And let's see how it holds up after another hour. Okay, we're coming up to the 3-hour mark now. And right now, battery life here on the S22, 38%. And then on the S23, still above 50%, 53%. Okay, so we've got our result here on the S22. It's now on 17% battery and the test has stopped. 4 hours and 32 minutes is what it's saying we're getting from a typical sort of work day. Now let's check the temperature. So we're getting around 40 degrees here, top right corner. We are starting to see the battery area heat up a little bit in the middle, but nothing too crazy. 40 degrees round about there is okay. And now let's see how the S23 is doing in the same amount of time running the same test. The maximum temperature is impressively 36.7 degrees. And you can see the heat again is dispersing much more evenly across the back, and that's a good thing. Okay, let's continue on for another hour now, and the S22 Ultra is out of the race. It's still on, it's still using power. But what we're really going to see now is how much better the new configuration is with the S23 and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 versus last year's chipset and that configuration. Okay, we're coming to the end of the PCmark battery life drain test, and what's really impressive here is the S23 Ultra can clearly outlast the S22 by more than 2 hours during a sustained workload. And check this out, the S22 Ultra is now on 5% battery, whilst the S23 is still running at 20%. And even more impressive than that is the fact that the S23 Ultra's temperature now is pretty much the same as it was 3.5 hours ago. You have to admit, that's pretty cool. So I got a request from one of the channel members to do a little side-by-side playing the same video content on the two devices. Apparently, some people have seen a difference, and we did see a difference in the screen brightness earlier on in this test. So I think it might be worth just doing a little side-by-side video comparison before we wrap this up. So this one's for you, Axe Viking. Appreciate the idea. Check this out. So I can only tell you what I see, and people might look at this differently. But the colors look a tiny bit deeper on the S23. Slightly brighter, the whites seem a little bit brighter over here on the S23. That shot looks exactly the same. I'm having to get real close here to see if I can spot a difference. It does feel like there's more sort of detail in the highlights here on the S23 than there is here. You know what? There seems to be a bit more sharpness, maybe a little bit more sharpness there on the S22. And I've seen a bit more detail here. This looks a bit more saturated, and this one looks like it's got a tiny bit more detail. That could just be my eyes playing tricks on me. I don't know. But I have to say it's very close. I do think there might be a difference in the sort of AI learning algorithms, because we did notice during the test that the screens were doing different things based on what they were actually doing. So maybe if the phone knows it's going to be playing games, it will change the color theme. And that could affect things. So if you open a game and then you open a different app, maybe it'll affect that app that you've opened after the game because it still thinks you're going to come back to it and play it. There's various reasons why that could happen. This shot, I can tell there's a difference in the green, and that little noise there was to indicate it's nearly time for me to go to bed. Anyway, shout out to everybody who stayed this long into the video. I really do appreciate you. If you guys enjoyed this video, you got any value out of it at all, a little thumbs up would make my day and I'd appreciate it. And if you'd like to see more content like this, let me know in the comments below. See you guys in the next one. Don't be late.